352 kills. That's what they told you Erich Hartmann scored. The Black Devil of the South. The greatest fighter ace in history. Except when historians actually cross-referenced his kill claims with Soviet loss records, only about 22% matched up. His actual score? Probably somewhere between 70 and 80. And that wonder weapon jet fighter that could have won the war if Hitler hadn't screwed it up? The engine literally fell apart after 10 hours of flight time. The Luftwaffe you learned about in documentaries, video games, and History Channel specials, it's mostly mythology. And today we're going to tear it apart. Let's start with the popular image. Germany rolls into Poland. The Luftwaffe destroys the Polish Air Force on the ground in the first hours. Blitzkrieg. Total dominance. Here's what actually happened. The Luftwaffe lost 564 aircraft in Poland. That's not a few scratches. That's significant attrition for a campaign that lasted 5 weeks. But here's the one nobody talks about. France. The Battle of France cost the Luftwaffe more aircraft than the Battle of Britain. Between 1,428 and 1,814 planes destroyed. 28% of their entire frontline strength. May 10th, 1940. First day of the Western Offensive. The Luftwaffe lost 308 aircraft in 24 hours. That's more than any single day of the Battle of Britain. And the aircrew losses? By the time Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, the Luftwaffe had already lost 11,068 aircrew killed, wounded, or missing. They went into the largest military operation in human history, already bleeding out. So why do we think they were invincible? Because their propaganda was better than their logistics. German pilots were the best trained in the world. You've heard this 1,000 times. And in 1939, it was actually true. Early Luftwaffe pilots had 150 to 200 hours of flight training before they saw combat. That's solid. But here's what killed them. No rotation policy. The Americans and British rotated their pilots home after a set number of missions. They became instructors. They trained the next generation. Germany didn't do this. Their experienced pilots flew until they died.
He's absolutely spoiling for it. He's desperate to go in. He's all ready and gung-ho. He's built his Luftwaffe. He's got his panzers now. He's got his massive armed forces. You know, he wants to test them. He wants to get this show on the road and prove it. You know, he's an arch gambler, Hitler.
Watch what happens to German training hours as the war progresses. By late 1944, German pilots were going into combat with 15 to 20 hours of training. Meanwhile, American pilots maintained 400 hours throughout the entire war. The math was brutal. With a 3.3% monthly death rate among fighter pilots, half of them were dead within 2 years. The first 5 months of 1944, the Luftwaffe had 100% turnover in fighter pilots, over 2,000 pilots killed or wounded. By November 1944, a new Luftwaffe pilot's life expectancy was 8 to 30 days. The best pilots in the world flew themselves into extinction. Let's talk about those kill counts. Erich Hartmann. 352 victories, the highest scoring ace in history. Except, here's a fun fact. On November 21, 1944, Hartmann claimed to have shot down a Soviet La-5. One problem. His unit didn't fly that day due to weather. The German verification system was essentially a rubber stamp. 90% of all claims submitted were confirmed. And when historians compared Luftwaffe kill claims to actual Soviet losses on the Eastern Front, the Luftwaffe claimed around 77,000 Soviet aircraft destroyed. The Soviets actually lost between 45,000 and 46,000. That's only 60% verification. 40% of claimed kills never happened. For Hartmann specifically, when his claims are cross-referenced with confirmed Soviet losses, only about 22% match. 70 to 80 kills is still impressive, but it's not 352. And this wasn't just Hartmann. This was systemic across the entire Luftwaffe. The few. Britain's last line of defense against the Nazi hordes, standing alone against impossible odds, except they weren't outnumbered.
Defense against the Nazi hordes and all this kind of stuff. And it's all second line of defense is the Royal Navy, which is the world's largest. And there's absolutely no chance on earth that a German invasion force made up of Rhine River barges.
At the start of the Battle of Britain, RAF Fighter Command had roughly 700 operational fighters. The Luftwaffe had about 725 single-engine fighters. That's not outnumbered, that's parity. But here's where it gets wild. Lord Beaverbrook's aircraft production miracle. In July 1940, Britain produced 496 single-engine fighters. Germany produced 240. The British were outproducing the Germans 2-1. By October 1940, RAF Fighter Command had grown from 644 to 732 operational fighters. The Luftwaffe's single-engine fighter force? It collapsed from around 725 to under 275. And here's what the Germans never understood: the doubting system. Britain had built the world's first integrated air defense network. Radar, ground controllers, observer corps, all feeding real-time data to fighter command. 90% interception rate. British fighters weren't flying around hoping to find Germans. They were being vectored directly onto incoming raids. And the channel? Every German pilot who bailed out became a POW. Every British pilot who bailed out was back in the fight the next day. August 18, 1940. 5 German aircrew lost for every 1 British pilot. Germany was never going to invade Britain. The Royal Navy would have slaughtered any crossing attempt, and the Luftwaffe couldn't have stopped them. And now for everyone's favorite myth: if only Hitler hadn't made it a bomber. The story goes that Hitler insisted the Me-262 be used as a bomber instead of a fighter, delaying the jet program and costing Germany the war. Here's the truth. Hitler's bomber order lasted about 6 months, and according to historian Dan Sharp, the actual delay to the first operational fighter unit? Less than 3 weeks. You want to know who actually delayed the Me-262? Willy Messerschmitt himself. He lobbied against the jet program to protect his Bf-109 production contracts. But the real problem? The engine. The Jumo 004 had a service life of 10 to 12 hours. Germany couldn't get the nickel and cobalt alloys for proper turbine blades, so they used an iron-based substitute, 70% iron in the turbine blades. They'd start failing after a few flights.
But Germany for a long time didn't provide them with proper aircraft. Instead, it supplied them with second-rate equipment. Thus, the existing industrial capacity and sometimes Air Force personnel was wasted on and in inferior planes. This only changed in mid-1942, when Germany finally realized that the war wouldn't be a short one. Now the Luftwaffe also supplied its allies with the Bf-109, and in late 1942, licenses were granted to produce planes and engines. This failure to support its allies was in contrast to the Western allies, who managed to build up the almost non-existing Canadian aircraft industry, which provided many excellent aircraft for the war effort.
March 18, 1945. The largest Me-262 operation of the war. 37 jets against 1,853 Allied aircraft. They shot down 13 bombers, 13 out of nearly 2,000. Even at full production with perfect engines, the Me-262 was never going to change anything. One more myth. The idea that the Luftwaffe was somehow clean, professional soldiers, not involved in atrocities. Crete, 1941. Luftwaffe paratroopers executed civilians at Kandamari. They razed the village of Kandanos to the ground. Luftwaffe ground troops participated in anti-partisan operations on the Eastern Front. 10,000 of them. The terror bombings? Warsaw, 1939, 25,000 to 40,000 civilians killed. Rotterdam, 1940, 800 to 980. Belgrade, 1941, 17,500. By 1944, 90,000 concentration camp prisoners were working in German aviation factories. The V-2 rocket program killed more people building it than it killed in attacks. Over 10,000 slave laborers died in the tunnels. The clean Luftwaffe was a post-war myth, deliberately constructed. Franz Halder was hired by the U.S. Army to oversee 700 former German officers writing sanitized history. We believed the lies because the people who wrote the history were the ones who committed the crimes. The real Luftwaffe wasn't a force of supermen with wonder weapons. It was an air force that went to war without strategic direction, ate its own experienced pilots, cooked its own statistics, and lost the production battle before it even started. They didn't lose because they were overwhelmed by numbers. They lost because they were outthought, outproduced, and outsystemed. The mythology was better than the reality, and it took historians decades to dig through the propaganda. Now you know what they found. If you want more history that actually holds up to scrutiny, subscribe. We do this every week.